Hi, my name is Enda Murray. I'm the director of the Irish Film Festival. I'm delighted to be joined tonight by Pat Collins, the director of That They May Face the Rising Sun, the opening night film in the 10th Irish Film Festival Australia, and lead actor Barry Ward, who plays Joe Rutledge. Guys, tá fáilte roimh. You're very welcome.
Thanks very much, Enda. Great to be in your festival.
Great to have you. If I can start with you, Pat. When we started the Irish Film Festival 10 years ago, we had your film Living in a Coded Land. And then 2018, we had a Song of Granite. So we're delighted to welcome you back and to open the festival with That They May Face the Rising Sun. Can you tell us a little bit about how this film came about? I know that you made a doco about John McGahern a couple of years back.
Yeah, I mean, I made a documentary back in 2000. We started filming a documentary with John back in 2004, and we worked throughout kind of 2005 on a documentary that went out on RTE and Irish television, and that was maybe about 2 years before he passed away. So we spent a lot of time with him, I suppose, over that year, over 2005, and I think it had been in my mind that of all of John's novels, I think that They May Face the Rising Sun was the one that kind of appealed to me most in terms of adapting it. But I don't think I was thinking of it at that time. I think it was only maybe later. It was actually 2015 when I approached John's wife, Madeline, and asked her what she thought of the whole idea of adapting that book. And she kind of more or less kind of, gave her blessing, really. And but I had been thinking of it for a good few years before that, and I suppose maybe it was because of the fact it was set around a kind of a rural community in rural Ireland that's in the late 70s, early 80s. Maybe I kind of felt a connection to it in that way, in that the world I came from, I suppose, was very similar to it. And I think it was because it was set over the course of a year, and it wasn't a very strong narrative. It was more to do with atmosphere and to do with the seasons passing, and it just appealed to me to do that. And I suppose I had a very strong connection to John's material from working on the documentary too.
Great. Barry, one of your earliest acting roles was in Family back in a long time ago in 1995, a film by another of Ireland's great storytellers, Roddy Doyle. Were you familiar with John McGahern's work before you got involved in this project?
Yes, I was. Yeah. From around that time, actually, from the mid-90s. I remember not long after that job you mentioned, Family, there was an RTE adaptation of Amongst Women. So I read that book then, and I'd been reading them since. So yeah, 30 years later, when I heard Pat had adapted That They May Face the Rising Sun, it was kind of on my radar and something I was really interested in being involved in. Yeah, I'd read a bunch of McGahern stuff.
Pat, yourself and Eamon Little wrote the screenplay. It must have been a daunting task to set this story to screen. How did you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Eamon wrote the first draft. We kind of discussed it. We kind of maybe did an adaptation first. The first draft would probably had everything in the book almost in the first draft. And then it was a question of just going through that and losing a couple of the characters and losing a couple of the storylines, really. And there was no way we could really include everything in it. So that was the most difficult part, really, was trying to lose some of the characters with staying true to the spirit of the book. But I think that was our main concern from the beginning, really, was staying true to the spirit of the book. And that even if we did lose characters, that we were still, that there might be some kind of, I suppose, residue of those characters in the story and in the script. And I think it was just true. We were writing it over the course of 5 years, not exclusively, obviously, but we kept going back to it and refining it, and even up until until we were filming, we were doing drafts and taking scenes out, and but it was a difficult task. But I mean, I think any book is probably difficult. I think they say it's easier to adapt a short story and build it up rather than trying to kind of reduce a novel. But we kind of found the hardest thing in a way was that whole idea of time and the seasons passing. How do you get that across in a script when it's very visual, really, you know? And that was kind of one of the hardest things, was trying to kind of so we decided, you know, we'd kind of describe nature in detail and put the descriptions of nature and time passing into the script, which made it a kind of more meditative script, I suppose, to read, and you had to appreciate that was going to be a big component of the film as well. But again, staying true to the dialogue as well, and I think McGahern, the characters were so well written. It was just a question of staying true to that. I think, really, you know, that you had a great understanding of the characters from the novel, and I mean, that's been our experience of screenings right across the country, really, is that everywhere you go, people kind of say that character is exactly like somebody who was a neighbour of mine. That could be in Donegal or in Leitrim or in West Cork. And I think the characters were so accurately drawn by McGahern. We just had to kind of keep true to that, and we kind of knew that if we did do that, we'd be on the right track, you know.
Yep. So I think in the press pack there was a quote: "Whatever film could be made would have to be immersive and experiential, and the actors would have to capture the complexity of these characters." So I was interested, Barry, like how what kind of preparation you do because, as I say, Pat, there's not a lot happens. It's not a very, you know, it's not an action film. So yeah, Barry, I was interested, you know, what kind of prep you do for a role like this.
It didn't differ a huge amount to other roles in terms of prep, to be honest. And I have a habit now of going through a script with a fine-tooth comb and highlighting all of the actions. And obviously, this isn't an action-filled movie, but still, there were, you know, there was enough for him to be doing to bring out from the page, and then it was just a case of committing to that. So, you know, there was a lot of, for Joe Rutledge, a lot of writing, obviously, and for that I actually sat for hours transcribing books. I started writing out The Grapes of Wrath, which is one of my favorite books. So I was writing that from page one, and also a brilliant nature book called The Peregrine, which is like a classic of natural writing. It's an old English book. And then I guess, you know, a lot of the descriptions of Joe in scenes was him simply listening or observing. So there was you know, a requirement to I think embrace a level of stillness that I'm not used to. That a lot of sitting and writing actually helped me embody that as a practice, you know.
Yeah. Pat, the film depicts Ireland in the 70s. It's almost rose tinted. Like, I know my own dad was from Belmullet in County Mayo, and I can remember him talking about Mehel, and that was what I was reminded of, you know. And in a way, it seemed as though John McGahern had reconciled, and it wasn't a bitter film, which I you know, I'm thinking some of the earlier films were a lot more angry. Do you think that that was the case?
I mean, I do. I mean, if you read the kind of the very early McGahern, there's a kind of he's quite I don't know if bitter is the right word, but he was definitely described things as he saw them, and sometimes that's very hard to read, especially in the short stories. Actually, I mean, some of the short stories are shockingly brutal, I think, and in terms of their descriptions of characters and how distasteful some characters in life are. And I think the Ireland that he kind of went back to live on in Leitrim, when he went back, and himself and Madeline went back, I think he had reconciled, or he had written a lot of the kind of that bitterness and out, I think, and I think he'd kind of fully kind of looked at the characters that were living around him. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's rose tinted in that way. I mean, we did keep some of the brutality that's in Rising Sun out of the film because we felt it was going to dominate too much. But I think there's a lot of kind of harsh realities, I think, that are in Rising Sun about the way Johnny's treated, in terms of, you know, that he's not kind of, he's more or less not allowed to come home, and the way I suppose that the difference in maybe characters like Patrick and the kind of the reality of his life in terms of poverty and his kind of probably relationship with alcohol, all those kind of things are kind of fairly accurate and fairly. There's nothing kind of romantic about them, really. You know, there's so I kind of think. I think it's more. It's still very realistic, I think, but I think there is a kind of a greater sense that McGahern is looking at all the positive aspects as well. That he's actually representing a world in all its complexity, for good and bad. I think anything that's either one or the other too much is an exaggeration, really. And I think, but I think McGahern, I think there was no exaggeration in it, really, kind of for ill or good. You know, I think it wasn't rose tinted, and it wasn't just focusing on all the negative either. So I think it was a full representation of the complexity of Irish life at the time, I think, and for good and bad, you know.
Yeah. Barry, I was going to ask, you were recently living in London, and I couldn't help but think of, you know, John McGahern going to London in the 60s, and must have been a brutal existence for a sensitive man to be working on building sites and stuff. But I was interested in your kind of coming back to Dublin, and how it feels now coming back to Dublin from London. And is it well, what's your feelings? Has it changed, or have you been away?
I spent 19 years living in London, and I've just recently moved back to Dublin. But no, moving to London when I did in 2005 was a much different and more pleasant and less challenging experience than it was for those in the 60s and 70s. You know, and we're not going over there anymore as unskilled labor and trying to eke out a living as we once were. As my friend said, we used to go over to work on the sites, and now we all go over to build the websites. You know, there's a lot of highly qualified Irish people going over to the UK now just for greater opportunities, you know. And what's interesting is you see how the kind of economic position the Irish once held at the, you know, bottom of the ladder, really, in terms of labour. Now, you know, we've progressed a great deal, and those positions are filled by other nationalities. You know, you've got a lot of Polish and Romanians doing the jobs that the Irish once did, but the Irish have kind of made a big indent up into English culture and the workforce. You know, it's far less of a struggle now. And personally, I was always over and back between London and Dublin with work anyway, so I never felt away for any great length of time enough to miss the place. You know.
Yep. Hey, I was interested, John. McGahern, it was raised near Ballinamore in Leitrim, and he returned there in later life. How did you find the location for your film? Where exactly is it?
Oh yeah, well we spent months and months actually looking for the right location in Leitrim, and we couldn't actually find it, and it was disappointing to us that we weren't able to find it. And I think it's just that there was so much, because it was set in the 1970s and early 80s, we needed a lake with houses that hadn't been kind of, I suppose, done up in the last 30 years. But I mean, there's been so much change to the kind of to the built environment in rural Ireland that it was very difficult to find it. So we ended up having to go to a place called Loch Nafooey, which is near Clonbar, near Carnamona, in kind of west Galway, kind of on the Mayo Galway border, and that's kind of where the main lake is. But we shot around 2 or 3 different lakes, Loch Mask, Lower Loch Mask, and Loch Corrib as well. And I think there's 5 lakes actually in the film in total. But yeah, it was kind of we were disappointed that we couldn't. If someone had said to me that we weren't going to shoot the film in Leitrim, I wouldn't have believed it. But we just weren't able to make it work. So we ended up in and it's an amazingly gorgeous area, Loch Nafooey and Clonbar and all that area. It's a big fishing, fly fishing country, and a lot of lakes. But yeah, it was lovely. But I still think it could have been shot in a lot of places in rural Ireland. Really, it could have been shot in West Cork, but we were kind of fairly intent on keeping it around the border area, or at least in the northern half of the country. And but yeah, it was, I think, finding the house where Joe Rutledge and Kate are living was one of the kind of the key things, with the laneway going up to the house, and that became a kind of a big feature of the film. Then the laneway going to the house and the different people and all the different characters walking up and down that laneway, and it kind of imposed the kind of a certain pace to the film as well. And I think without that house and without that laneway, it would feel like a different film. So we were very happy with the way it turned out in terms of the location.
What's your favorite moments looking back on making the film, Pat?
That's a difficult one. I mean, you know, when you're finished it and it's being presented in front of an audience, you can't really say that's enjoyable, really. I mean, I think it was kind of maybe, yeah, it's hard to know. I think when you wrap shooting a film, I think it's a great, that's more like a relief than being enjoyment. But it's I think the whole crew and I think being in on location there was a huge pleasure. I think in terms of, you know, working with the actors that were there, the actors that we had, and the crew that we had in the location that we had. It was 5 or 6 weeks, and it was very little stress attached to it, in terms of, you know, everybody seemed to get on really well, and it was kind of a special time looking back at it. And but I think sometimes it could be, you know, maybe even over this summer, like it's screened a lot of places, a lot of countries already, in Sweden and America and Italy, and but there's certain screenings. There was a screening recently in West Cork, and it was kind of in a parish hall, and there was a great response to it, and it really felt, screening it in a place like a parish hall, actually, there was a kind of a lovely feel to the screening, kind of almost like a very homely kind of feeling to it. And
Great.
and I remember actually thinking that's really, it landed so well with the audience, and the atmosphere of the hall was so lovely. And that was during the Skull Film Festival. That was really nice.
Very good. Barry, I was going to ask you the same question. Is there, like, any moments that you look back and with fondness from the production?
The entire thing was just really blissful from start to finish. It was an amazing experience. So I couldn't pick out any one moment as being better than the rest. But I do think there's something really special and final in a good way when it's first presented in front of an audience. So the premiere in the London Film Festival, it was just, I don't know, it felt really special, given, you know, I think the audience is really the last piece of the jigsaw, and the work is not done until it is presented in front of an audience. And that completes the whole process, you know. So that's always special. But also a standout moment during the shooting was one of the greatest directions I've ever been given, when Pat said to me, when I was walking down towards the house to visit Patrick on Christmas Day in the winter, he said, "Okay, we'll do that again, and can you walk down the hill more like a writer and less like Sean Ryder?"
Oh, Jesus.
Less happy Mondays.
Less happy Mondays. Great. Hey, I could chat on, but we've got to wrap it up. Gura Mila Maiga, thanks a million for giving us the time, and good luck with the rest of the journey of that they may face the rising sun. And Slán agus Banach.
Enda, thank you.
Thanks. All the best.
Thanks a million.